Hi, this is Ilya with Worn&Wound, and today we're going to take a look at the Seiko SRP777 and the SRP775, two very cool watches from Seiko's reissue of the 6309. Being that we're huge fans of Seiko here at Worn&Wound, this is a release that we were all really excited for, and something I think our readers were excited for as well. In a world where vintage divers can sell for six figures easily, the 6309 and other siblings in Seiko's dive watch family remain great affordable options for those of us looking for something beautiful and vintage but without having to break the bank. The 6309 was produced by Seiko from 1976 until around 1988, so it's by no means a rare watch. But with that being said, they are getting harder to come by in unmolested condition, with many Franken watches floating on eBay and on forums with aftermarket dials, handsets, and bezel inserts. Overall, replacement parts, especially new old stock ones, are getting harder to find, and you'd likely have to pay a premium even if you did. There are guides online for finding all original ones, but they can be intimidating for somebody who doesn't really want to delve into that and is just looking for a watch of good quality and original parts. So I think this is why this re-release makes a whole lot of sense. It's for those of us who appreciate the aesthetic of the 6309 but don't necessarily want to deal with vintage watches or hunting down a watch that's all original and not tampered with. And that's what this watch is. It really is just a faithful homage to the 6309 and not a direct copy. And I think that Seiko was right in going down that route. I have to say that I'm really happy with the effort put in by Seiko here. I think it's great as both an homage watch, but also as a watch that feels just modern and a compliment to the brand's current catalog. And that's, I think, saying something concerning the design is nearly 40 years old. There are currently 4 variants slated for release in early 2016. The 2 you see here, as well as the SRP773, which is blue with a bracelet, and the SRP779, which comes with a Pepsi bezel, and that comes on a rubber strap. At an MSRP of $475, I think they're well positioned within Seiko's Prospex line, and let's just take a closer look. The cushion-shaped case comes in at 44.3 millimeters wide, with a lug-to-lug height of approximately 48 millimeters. The thickness of the watch comes in at around 14 millimeters, and it has a lug width of 22 millimeters. It's certainly a large watch, and while I do have a preference for smaller watches overall, I can't help but just love the proportions here. The size feels purposeful and not intentionally bloated like some modern divers tend to be. It wears extremely well, much like the original did. It's just comfortable on the wrist. The case is wonderfully rounded here near the bottom, so nothing digs into your hand, which tends to happen with some larger watches, especially larger divers. Overall, it's a well-executed design, much like the original was. It is slightly larger than the 6309 was, or rather, it's a bit taller than the 6309 was, but you won't really notice that nominal difference when it's on the wrist. The finishing on the case features circular brushing on top, which then transitions to a highly reflective polish finish as it moves towards the bottom of the case. There's a sharp delineation between these two surfaces, and it gives the case a very attractive visual flow along the side. At 4 o'clock, you have the oversized crown, unsigned here just as it was on the 6309. It's recessed into the case, but it's easily accessible, which is not always the case when you're dealing with a recessed crown. Overall, the action's pretty smooth when screwing and unscrewing. It's not the best, probably more in line with what you would find on the 007 than something a little bit higher end, but I think that's okay given the price point and the fact that it's perfectly serviceable. And with that said, the case is rated to 200 meters, and it is also ISO rated, which means that this watch complies to the ISO 6425 international standards for diving watches. The bezel is a 120-click unidirectional diver's bezel with a black aluminum insert and a shielded loom pip at 12 o'clock. It has a 2-tiered groove pattern that allows for a tight grip, and the bezel action is really great. It's a bit tight, but without any sort of wobble or backplay, and at this price point, you normally tend to get some wobble or less than stellar action. So you can see that the engineering here really does check out. I also really like the way the insert declines a bit towards the crystal. It's a feature that's common on the 6309, and it's something that a lot of collectors really love. Sitting on top of the bezel is Seiko's proprietary mineral glass called Hardlex. I think Hardlex makes sense within the context of this watch and its positioning within the Prospex line. Plus, my experience with Hardlex has been nothing but positive, so I think I really have no reservations with its use here. One of the biggest improvements to the original design is the inclusion of drilled through lugs on the SRP. I'm a huge fan of drilled lugs on watches. I think most watches should probably have them purely from a practicality and functional standpoint, and that's no exception here. Seiko divers generally come with notoriously fat spring bars, which can be a real pain to remove, and this just facilitates the process. Flipping the watch around, you'll see that it has a screw-down stainless steel caseback with Seiko's Tsunami logo dead center and some of these specs along the edge. One curious thing about the caseback is that it features the words Air Diver, a designation given to some of the other watches in the Prospex line, mainly the Monsters. It's kind of curious given that the Prospex line does have 3 designations, land, sea, and air, and the 609 is clearly a dive watch. It was always a dive watch, so being that this watch pulls from that heritage, I don't know why it would have the word air on it, but I thought it was just something worth pointing out. Here, Seiko uses the 4R36 caliber movement. It has 25 jewels, 21,600 beats per hour. It hacks into hand winds and has 41 hours of power reserve. It's definitely a solid movement from Seiko. It's one of their workhorses. It's not as tightly engineered as the 6R15, which is Seiko's competitor to the 2824. Now, do I wish Seiko had sprung for the 6R15 here? Sure. But do I really think it makes much of a difference? Not really. The tolerances here on these 2 watches have been pretty good. I haven't timed them exactly, but I haven't noticed any egregious timekeeping fluctuations. So, if it means keeping the cost down, I'm okay with this movement being in this watch. Like the case, the dial is largely a reproduction of the dial on the 6309. And just like the case, it has some differences and features that I would argue are upgrades over the original. Some similarities include a day-date function at 3 o'clock, which you can see through a beveled date window, the hilted sword separating the 2 markers at 12 o'clock, and the sword and hour hands, which are at this point iconic to Seiko. The markers are bold and legible, everything a dive watch should be, and they're generously filled with Seiko's newer LumiBrite Lume. There's a great 3D effect to the way the Lume material is applied here, so the markers really pop out and catch the light in a pleasing way. It gives the dial a much higher end feel than what you would get with just a flat printed dial, and I'm really happy with the way it's executed here. Of course, the nighttime Lume is incredible. Seiko's new LumiBrite compound is great, and in my experience, the watch still glows like a torch way into the night. One thing that wasn't clear from the official images from Seiko is that each marker is surrounded by a very fine metallic border. In the case of the 777, it's silver, and in the case of the 775, it's gold to match the bezel and hands. As you would expect, when it catches the light, it really does bring the dial to life. Unlike the original, the SRP is a bit text-heavy. You have the Seiko logo type under the 12 o'clock position, and resting above the 6 o'clock spot are 3 lines of text and branding, starting with the Prospex logo, followed by automatic, and then finally the diver's 200 meters designation. Despite the many lines of text, the dial does not look cluttered, and the whole thing does look balanced. The watch is not without some faults. There are a few issues that I did notice. The first is probably not really an issue, more of a point of preference. I would have preferred the second hand from the 6309 with the lollipop on the front end rather than the one from the 007, which has the lollipop on the counterweight. I've always found that to be a slightly curious design choice, and while it has no effect on the actual functionality of the watch as a diving instrument, it's not what I would prefer aesthetically. The other is actually a problem that Seiko has become somewhat notorious for, and that's the issue of the misaligned chapter ring. Now, the misalignment is very slight here, and had I not been aware of the issue, I might not have even noticed or bothered to look. That being said, it is there. It's very slight. But I have seen reports where other people have indicated that their chapter rings are perfectly aligned. So, it's a bit up in the air what you will get when you get this watch. But again, I want to reiterate that the misalignment is very slight and not as bad as I've seen on some other models from Seiko. As I mentioned earlier, the different models of the SRP are available on different strap options. You have the option of a metal bracelet like the one you see here, or a black silicone strap. The bracelet is 22 millimeters at the end links, and then it tapers down to about 20 millimeters at the clasp. It has 4 points for a micro adjustment. It has a diver's extension, and the links are connected via a pin collar retaining system. The bracelet is essentially an oyster-style bracelet, though the only difference is that the outer links have polished inner edges. while the rest of the bracelet is a brushed finish. Overall, I think it's a very good looking bracelet, and the quality does feel solid. The clasp is perhaps a bit basic, but I wasn't really expecting much from Seiko at this price. I do find that it's perfectly serviceable here, and Seiko isn't really known for manufacturing clasps that good anyways until you get their higher ranges. So I think for what we have here is perfectly okay. That being said, I don't necessarily like to wear the watch on the bracelet. I think that it adds some significant heft to the watch, and the watch head is already pretty heavy, so I definitely prefer the silicone strap over the bracelet. The silicone strap is smooth and pliable. It's much nicer than the Z22 rubber straps that come with the 007. I find that strap to be a little bit hard and uncomfortable, especially if you have some hair on the wrist. It tends to pull on those hairs. And that's not something that you have with the strap here. The strap also features a very attractive sort of buckle design. It has really nice finishing. There's brushed surfaces and a polished surface on the side. There's also a really good looking keeper here. It's a metal keeper with sort of beveled edges that are polished, and the keeper itself is brushed. And overall, it's just a very solid strap that I think is an excellent complement to a very well-built watch. On the wrist, the watch wears extremely well. It might be 44 millimeters, but it definitely doesn't really wear like a 44 millimeter watch. There's something a little bit subdued about it. It's very comfortable on the wrist. None of the parts really dig into your hand as you pivot your wrist around, partly because of the recessed crown into the case. If you've ever owned the original 6309, you'll definitely feel like you're wearing that watch. The case is largely the same, and the experience of wearing this watch is very much in line with what it was to have and own and wear a 6309. In conclusion, I think that Seiko really hit it out of the park with this one. So many brands today are tapping into their histories to bring back watches from the past, and so many brands just get that wrong. Here, I think Seiko did a great job bringing the 6309 to the present, modernizing it in the correct way by, keeping the spirit and feel of the original and just upping the build quality to modern standards. At this point, I would probably even advise people buy this watch over the 007. The 007 is a great watch by many standards, but this new entry into Seiko's entry-level dive watches just feel superior in almost every single way. The street price is currently around $350 USD, $370 on the bracelet. So yeah, it is twice the price of the 007, but I think it's totally worth it to spring the extra cash and get the SRP instead. For the full review, please head to worn&wound.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.